Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this this session of our winter-spring webinar series. It's lovely to have you all with us. This morning we have the lovely Franica Yovich join us, and she's going to be talking about nutrition and blood cancer, which is very exciting. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Melody, and I'm one of the support services coordinators in the Northern region. If you haven't joined us before, welcome. We record all of these sessions, and so you'll be able to come and have a look back at the slides and at the talk once that's been uploaded to our YouTube channel shortly after the session. If you have any questions, there's a little question and answer panel down the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to put any questions down there, and we should have a little bit of time at the end to answer any of those. Franica has kindly agreed to answer your questions, so make full use of that if you've got any burning questions. And yes, so I'll introduce Franica now. So Franica has been a dietitian for over 20 years, and she's worked both in New Zealand and the UK across a variety of areas, including primary care, project work, and management. Since 2018, she's been the clinical lead of Dietetics at Auckland City Hospital and is the dietitian on the haematology ward at the moment. In her clinical role, Franica supports patients to improve their well-being through a collaborative approach, improving nutrition and their relationship with food. Franica is passionate about the non-diet approach, cognitive behavioural therapy, and improving counselling and communication skills for dietitians. She has been and continues to be involved in lecturing and facilitating workshops on these topics for dietetic students and dietitians. In 2011, Franica completed a postgraduate certificate in health sciences and cognitive behavioural therapy. And in 2016, she completed her Masters of Dietetics, in which she evaluated the effectiveness of the non-diet approach to improve people's food behaviours and relationships. So thank you very much, Franica. We're very grateful to have you with us this morning, and I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thanks, Melody. Ooh. Great, thanks, Melody. And hello, everybody. It's really nice to be here this morning, starting the end of the week with you all. As Melody said, we're going to talk about nutrition and blood cancer today, area I've been working in the last 2 years, and I'm very happy to be here to really hopefully provide some information, give you some reassure you where you're at, and also answer some questions. So we'll get started. I think the biggest thing with a cancer diagnosis of any kind, including haematology and blood cancer, is it can create a lot of new feelings you have to deal with. You've got a lot of questions, and you want to know what is the best way forward. Often you may feel like you've got no control. The doctors and the team, the nurses are recommending what to do, they're caring for you, they're giving treatments, telling you when to take meds, etc., doing things. And it's all new. So food is one area where you can have control over, and you eat on a regular basis, you still do it. So it's one that's quite important to us, because generally we like eating. A lot of us are foodies. We enjoy our food, and it's one thing we know how to do pretty well. So the biggest thing is, though, where do you get your information from? Because there's so many sources. There's the media, there's family and friends, there's magazines, there's the internet, there's total strangers, because believe it or not, total strangers happily will give advice as well. And then there's your health professional. As I mentioned, you eat, but so does everybody else. And everyone has an opinion on food. Most people also know someone who's had a cancer diagnosis. They know what they've done. They've heard things that work. They've read about something in the paper, and most people are happy to offer their advice and their opinion. So when you look out there, there is a lot of information about what is good and what is bad for cancer. And how do we know what we should be doing? These are just some of the things when I did a Google search and came up with. Right in the middle here, and you might see my arrow, is shark cartilage. Now, I don't know if many people remember this, but just before or about the time I became a dietitian, just afterwards, about 20 years ago, 15 years ago, it was all the rage and everyone was into it. Now you don't hear about it at all. So a lot of these things are touted as the cure for a cancer, but actually there's not a lot of evidence, or there's no evidence about them. But people do it, they may feel better, and a lot of these things may give some form of improvement in someone's well-being, or they may feel better because they're doing something, but often there is nothing there that actually says they will actually kill cancer or prevent cancer. So how do we know what's good and what's not? Well, there's several things to think about. Does it sound too good to be true? If it is, or if it does, then probably it is. Does it promote or ban specific foods? Again, if it does, then quite likely it's not a miracle cure or the best thing, because ideally your body needs a range of foods and a range of nutrients to actually work. And if it starts banning foods or only promoting a certain thing, then sometimes a cost comes along with that as well. Does it promote a one-size-fits-all, as in this is going to work for everyone? Because again, we're all individuals and we need different things. So generally that's not the case. Does it also promise quick and dramatic, I can't even speak, results, such as it will cure, it will be the answer? Then again, maybe that's not right. And also the reason you can tell sometimes if it's maybe not the best thing after all is if all the claims are just based on personal testimonials. This worked for me, sort of thing. So realistically, when you're into it, is it can be really overwhelming and there's a lot of information to work through. And I quite liked this cartoon because I thought it probably describes it, because at the initial, when you're in the middle, particularly say with a new diagnosis, you're getting so much information and it can basically probably blow our mind and go, what am I doing? Where do I go with here? So the question, I guess, is who do we listen to, and what is myths and what are facts? So we're just going to touch on that a little bit now before we also then talk about some of the practical advice. So I've just pulled out a few, and I also apologise to all the cat lovers out there, but I'm very much a dog person, so I've peppered them through the presentation to at least give you something to look at while listening. So we're just going to touch on a few of the main ones that are out there at the moment. And firstly, what I should probably note is the majority of research when it comes to cancer relates to tumour cancers, not blood cancers. There's very little research and conclusive research on nutrition and blood cancers at all. And in fact, when it comes to cancers, there's still not a lot of strong evidence around a lot of what recommendations are. So what we do know when we look at meat and dairy causing cancer is what we do know, there's strong evidence showing a link between red meat and processed meats when it comes to colorectal cancer. Now, I fully appreciate this is not a blood cancer, but this is why I'm kind of talking a little about it. And for those that are wondering, oh, what's a processed meat? Those are the ones that have been salted, cured, fermented, smoked. And generally this is to enhance the flavour and to preserve them. And you'll know this is where things like nitrates come into it. So there is also some limited evidence suggesting there's a link between red meat and processed meats and some of the other cancers. But I think generally what confuses the information is we know that people who eat large amounts of red meat tend to eat less poultry, fish, fruit, vegetables, those sorts of foods. So that the impact of red meat on cancer progression could actually be in part related to decreased intake of these other foods, which have a lot of beneficial nutrients in them. So generally the rule of thumb when it comes to meat is if you like it, you don't have to avoid it. The recommendation is to limit red meat and processed meats to 3 serves of meat a week. We do recommend choosing lean meat and good quality sources of meat because these are excellent sources of protein. They have all the amino acids your body wants. But if you don't like red meat, then it's okay. There's other proteins you can eat, including fish, poultry, lentils, pulses, tofu, egg, nuts, and your milk products. So if you prefer not to eat animal protein, it's just important to ensure you're getting adequate protein and energy from your diet. The protein is used to basically keep your muscles going, to build your muscles, to replenish that supply of tissue. And the energy is there. That's what your cells use to regenerate, to grow, and basically keep you going. So the recommendation is we should be having 1 or 2 serves of meat or alternatives daily, and a serving is the size of your palm. So we've each got one of those. If you're bigger, you get a bigger palm. If you're smaller, you get a smaller palm, but having 1 or 2 servings of those. Now, if we move on to dairy, there is no good evidence drinking milk that it causes cancer. There is some strong evidence showing a probable decrease for risk of colorectal cancer, and there's some evidence regarding decreasing the risk of breast cancer if you're having milk or dairy products. However, on the other side, there is some evidence showing dairy or high calcium could increase the risk of prostate cancer. So what you can see is there's kind of like you can and you can't. There's some benefits, and potentially there's not some benefits, but it's a bit of a mixed case. Generally, the consensus is that a moderate intake is fine and the benefits outweigh the risk. And what we know from milk or dairy products is one of the key things is calcium, and calcium is important for our bones. So again, if you like milk and cheese, you can eat it. But if you can't eat dairy products because you're lactose intolerant or you have a dairy allergy, then that's fine. Or if you choose not to have them because you don't just like them, then that is also fine. And there's plenty of dairy alternatives that you can choose from, such as calcium fortified soy milk, cheese, yogurts. There's actually quite a range of food, and I've seen the massive increase in the last 3 to 5 years compared to when I first started working. So the recommendation is that we should be having 2 to 3 serves of milk or milk products daily. A serving is a glass of milk or the equivalent of 30 grams of cheese. Another way of getting calcium is eating fish with bones, so thinking sardines, tin sardines, nuts, green leafy vegetables. They are all good sources of calcium. So the next one is vegan and vegetarian diets. These have become very prominent. There's a lot more interest in them nowadays, and a lot more people are being told to go vegan or vegetarian once they have a cancer diagnosis. What we do know is that plant foods, fruit, vegetables, cereals, nuts, and legumes are good sources of fiber, and they have protective properties like carotenoids and polyphenols, which protect against cell damage. We know that plant foods are therefore likely to provide an anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effect, so eating more plant foods is beneficial. However, again, there's not a lot of research that shows vegan or vegetarian diets prevent cancer or reduce the negative outcomes from cancer. The research that has been done is quite limited. It's quite small study size, and there's no consistency in the actual diets. So some actually were plant-based but included meats, those sorts of things. Some were fully vegan. So definitely more research is known in this area, because we do know there will be benefits of including a lot more plant-based foods in our diet. If you're having a vegan or vegetarian diet, then it's important just to plan your meals well and ensure you've got good protein sources, because particularly with a vegan diet, it can be quite easier to overlook these. And if they're not done properly, then people may not get enough energy and protein and may lose weight unintentionally, which we will talk about a bit later, can also impact their treatment and how things progress. So I guess the key areas there is thinking, if you're not having meats and stuff, it's getting those proteins, what we mentioned before, from lentils, pulses, tofu, alternate milk products, your soy, milks, cheeses, etc. There's lots of options. What we do know is there is a lot more research around the Mediterranean diet, which is plant-based, includes healthy oils, and has moderate amounts of animal proteins. And what that evidence suggests is a positive relationship between a Mediterranean diet and cancer mortality. And we know that for most people, following a plant-based diet or including more plant-based foods won't harm them. And for those that maybe don't eat so well, including more of those foods is definitely going to be a healthier option, especially if they plan their meals properly. So the third one there is an alkaline diet. I actually don't come across this as much in the area I work, but sometimes it is mentioned. And so I thought I'd just mention it. So the alkaline diet is based on the premise that food has an impact, direct impact on the acidity or alkalinity of our blood. And the theory is based on that the so-called acid-producing foods like meat, eggs, dairy, that they're bad and should be avoided because they can create an acidic environment in our bodies, which causes cancer to grow. However, what is really important to remember and is often skipped over when this diet is mentioned is the physiology of our bodies and the fact that the food we eat basically has no impact on the pH of our blood or our body, as this is tightly regulated by our lungs and our kidneys. And if your lungs and your kidneys are working fine, then actually it will be fine. And it's not food that actually affects it. So your body has the ability to stay in balance. It will stay at the right pH, and the cheese that you're eating is not going to override this function and cause it to become more acidic. And lastly, sugar feeds cancer. This is one that probably does come up, and there's a lot of concern about that because obviously we don't want to make our diagnosis or your diagnosis any worse or promote or speed it up, I guess. So yes, cancer cells do use energy to replicate and grow. And yes, sugar does provide energy. But what it does is provide energy for all our cells to grow and develop. And without energy, then the cancer cells may not grow and they may die off, but also our healthy cells don't grow either, and they will die off, and they don't replicate, and they don't recover. And we need that energy for our good cells to also do their jobs. So when this happens, it leads to a lack of energy, so things don't work as well. The body isn't able to work as well. There can be weight loss, fatigue, and tiredness, and there's just like a spiral. So what's important to think about with sugar is sugar comes in different forms. There's what we call our simple carbohydrates, which is like our table sugar. So the thing you put in your tea or coffee, and it's also found in drinks, cakes, biscuits, those sorts of things. These foods we can totally cut down on because nutritionally they don't offer a lot more. But from my perspective, what I encourage people to do is if you want a piece of cake, you can have a piece of cake. But it's looking at the whole diet. And that's where it comes into is carbohydrates are also found in fruit, vegetables, breads, rice, pasta, potato, and kumara. These are slightly more complex and they're generally what we call our starchy carbohydrates as well. And these carbohydrates come along with vitamins, minerals, and fiber, which are all nutrients that your body needs to be healthy and to stay healthy. So as I said, you can definitely reduce your simple sugar intake from table sugar, cakes and biscuits, but we do encourage that you keep eating fruit and vegetables and choosing whole grain breads and cereals because they're also foods that keep you fuller and keep you going. So in that case, what are the recommendations and what should we be doing? Oh, doesn't want to move on. This comes from the World Cancer Research Fund and just a really nice summary of how we should be eating. Generally, the recommendations for eating during treatment are the same as the cancer prevention recommendations. We've talked a lot about this, so a lot of these foods already. So generally, if you can't eat them because you can't tolerate them, you've got allergies, then definitely don't have them and find an alternative. But the key point is aiming to have a varied diet rich in fruit and vegetables and whole grains, limiting fast foods, limiting the consumption of red meat, we've mentioned to 3 times a day, and also limiting the consumption of sugar-sweetened drinks because they're an excessive sugar source, and alcohol. Physical active and being active and doing exercise is really important. Doesn't mean you have to go to a gym or run a marathon, though obviously you can do this if you want to, but a variety of activities that you enjoy, like walking and swimming and dancing and gardening and golf. Basically just being active and being outside is not only important for our physical self, but also for our mental health. Exercise and activity in a simple form release feel-good hormones, and that helps from the side of anxiety, depression, low mood, and just basically improves quality of life. So I guess thinking back to the previous ones, a lot of diets that are touted to be good for cancer, what they all pretty much have in common is that they tend to be more expensive often because there's special foods you have to buy, or things the basics you can't have, or you might need to throw in a supplement, or more expensive variations of foods. But also what usually happens is they tend to be lower in energy because they'll often restrict a food or a food group. They eliminate sometimes, and at a time when your body actually has higher energy requirements because of your diagnosis, it may mean that your body doesn't get all the nutrients it requires. And why this is important is because of the risk of malnutrition. And this happens when your diet doesn't contain the right nutrients. Malnutrition you may know of, and think skinny, small people, malnourished, bone showing, but actually malnutrition happens to anyone. It doesn't matter what size or shape you come in, because it's a loss of muscle mass and also fat loss. That's unintentional, and it's come because you're not trying to. Cancer treatment can increase the risk of malnutrition anyway because of the side effects, which we're going to talk about. So it's something we're really keen to focus on, and when I see people, we're aware of, because malnutrition can actually impact how you respond to your treatment and how successful that can be. And also malnutrition increases the risk of infection and lowers your immunity, which we know chemotherapy and the treatments you're on also does. So what we want to do is ensure someone is in their best physical shape to deal with what they're going through as well. So how malnutrition can be affected by the side effects of treatment. Now, some of you may have had treatment already, some of you may not have, and so you may have experienced this or not, but generally tiredness, just a lack of fatigue, and probably a lot of times people say it's their motivation, they just don't feel like doing things. Sometimes actually just, and I like this one, but you're just too tired to even eat. So alongside that comes a poor appetite. You might have loved food before, but all of a sudden you just don't feel like eating. There's just a lack of desire. Or even if you kind of feel like eating, go, oh, I'd like that. The food comes in front of you and you look at it and you're like, oh, I just can't eat. So that's actually quite a common one. And it's quite a weird one because you may look right, you may feel fine, but you just can't eat. Also, nausea and vomiting comes alongside with a lot of the drugs. Medications that are given can cause nausea, vomiting, taste changes, and I think that's a biggie when you're expecting to eat a certain thing and it tastes like something else. So often people will say there's a metallic taste, there might be a sour taste. Sometimes for some people food tastes a lot sweeter, or just there's no taste whatsoever. Another side effect is dry mouth. So swallowing things, it just feels like sandpaper in the mouth, and it's just hard to kind of chew, move around the mouth and get down. Diarrhea, again, treatments, whether it's chemotherapy or medications, can often cause diarrhea. And again, this can put people off eating. And often it's said to me is, I don't want to eat because it's just going to come out the other side. So that can be very not very good either. And mucositis, which are mouth and throat ulcers. So this can make it very difficult to swallow, to chew and swallow foods. So thinking about how we manage the side effects, it definitely comes down to what works for each person, but dry mouth, sometimes drinking before meals, can help. So just to put a bit of moisture in there. Definitely choosing soft and moist foods, having sauces and gravies with foods is really helpful. And sometimes I suggest to people chewing gum or sucking a lolly before eating, just to stimulate some saliva. It's a very short-term impact or outcome with it, but it can help in some situations. And generally I've grouped poor appetite, nausea and mucositis together because the things talking about here kind of work for everyone. We generally encourage little and often. Now this is one because sometimes the side of food is very off-putting and that could trigger nausea, but just you look at a plate and go, oh, I can't eat that, that's too much. So little mentally is easier to cope with, and often, and that way it allows you to get what you might normally get in 3 meals across 6 or 7 meals across the day. Soft and easy to eat foods, because if you're tired, if you're not really feeling like eating, you don't want to eat something that takes a lot of effort, that's a lot of chewing. So steak is a good example. It's like, oh, eat. Whereas a soft casserole or stew, where it's already a bit softer and meltier and you don't have to chew it as much, goes down easier. I also talk about an apple versus banana. Think about an apple and it's chew. Oh, I'm taking a while to get through the apple. Banana, it's just peel it and chomp through a couple of mouthfuls and it's gone. So it's a lot easier to cope with. And when you're feeling tired and not really feeling liking it, that's what you want, simple and easy. Cold foods. Cold foods often seem to be more tolerated because, again, smell triggers nausea often for some people. So when you're, you might go, oh, I really want it, but then it comes in front of you and then the smell's like, oh, can't do it. And many of you might have had that experience. So cold foods often work. And in hospital, when we're working with people, we often find people tolerate breakfast fabulously, cereal, juice, milk, fruit, but dinner, not so great. The other thing which I haven't put there is often people also tolerate things better at a certain time of the day. In hospital, we often find it's during the morning and maybe midday. And often that's because you're rested, you've had a good night's sleep, you know, but by the end of the day when they're tired, lots of things have been going on, etc., you've got less resilience, and then the food comes in, you don't really feel like eating, you're tired and just not able to have much. So that's also quite normal. So the key is to maximize the time of day when you most feel like eating. And in the other times, drinks are a great idea. They can be high protein, high energy, and just sipping it away in it and having it. Generally after meals, trying to eat first, because we want to kind of keep that social aspect or that eating if you can. But if it's too hard, a drink is fine. So the other thing we recommend, and I'll talk to everyone about when I see them, is fortifying meals. We encourage high energy and protein. So rather than eating more, can you get more in your food for less? So still the same volume, but you're actually getting more nutrition. So ideally choosing easy to eat protein options. So eggs, cheese, milk, soups that may be milk based, that sort of thing, or have meats, fish, lentils in them. So we're wanting to add nutrition, not volume, as mentioned. So these are some of the ideas how we can do that. We can add butter, cream, cheese to our meals and our foods. We can add extra oil or butter to mashed potatoes, or stir it through cooked rice, or when we're cooking. Cream or cheese or milk to soups. Adding grated cheese to pretty much everything if you like cheese. I'm probably making people's dreams come true here by suggesting this, and others will be like, oh, I don't like cheese. But grate cheese on scrambled eggs, on vegetables, on pasta. Avocados, we've got great avocados when they're in season, putting those on, or mayonnaise into sandwiches or on toast. Add nuts and seeds and syrup to things like ice cream, custards and yogurt. So those are all little easy ways of adding a little bit, but not a lot of volume. And then we've got our drink options. So as mentioned, drinks can be fabulous. One problem is they can fill you up. So we usually encourage to eat first and then have a drink, because you want to kind of keep that gut working and breaking things down if it can. But there's options of smoothies, milkshakes and juices, and you can fortify them. So adding milk powder, just the standard milk powder you buy at the supermarket, ice cream, yogurt to drinks. You can add fruit and avocado and cream as well. So there's lots of things you can do. Obviously, some of those things work better with milky-based ones. Others you can do on a juice-based. And again, just having them in between your meals. I generally would often suggest to people have a milk drink a day and have a fruit juice a day, just to add to whatever you're eating. And then for some people, what we move on to, and generally everyone with a diagnosis of cancer is eligible for supplements, basically, particularly because there's a risk of potential malnutrition there, depending on how you're going. But what the oral nutrition supplements do is they provide energy and protein in an easy way. So some of you will know them. Fortisip, Ensure are standard ones we use. They come in a liquid version and they come in a powder version. And they're in addition to food. So they're not, the plan is not to substitute a meal out and put a drink in, but we will encourage to have between meals or after eating and add to. So with the powder, it's fully subsidized. So both are on prescription. The powder is fully subsidized and can be made into a drink. Depending on the product, it's chocolate or vanilla. So with the vanilla one, I often suggest adding it to food as well. So things like, we had a person in on the ward the other day who was actually using her Fortisip and adding it to her Wheat Bix and making a Wheat Bix Fortisip. With a vanilla flavoured one. But you can also do things like with the powder, add a spoonful to your yogurt, to your custard, add it to your porridge, add it to those things that are more sweet or neutral, that it's not going to mind a vanilla flavour. And that's a nice, easy way of adding a little more without having to drink as well, or making up a drink. So there is a range of flavours and we can work with what can work for you. Generally how it works is myself or your dietitian can prescribe, or your doctor, and also your GP. But what I do encourage is, if you're kind of having them and you're feeling really sick and you go, oh, I don't like them, try them again at another time when you're feeling better, because actually it can change the whole experience and what you think about them. So one of the other things that is quite important, you may have heard about, is food safety. It's especially important during treatment if you have a suppressed immune function or system. So there's just some key points, and I haven't gone into it all here, but it's general food safety. And if anyone's had a child in the last probably definitely 15 years, then you'll know when we say a pregnancy diet, what a pregnant lady can't eat. And this is the same sort of thing. It's those foods that are at high risk of bacterial growth. So what we do encourage is to wash hands thoroughly before eating and with food prep, to keep raw meat separate from cooked food, or when you're cooking it, when you're preparing it, and when you're storing it, to also cook meat and poultry and fish and eggs thoroughly. So your steak can't be blue anymore or medium rare, it needs to be well done. Eggs, not poached, but boiled. Boiled, hard boiled or scrambled. Fish needs to be cooked. You wouldn't have it raw as a sashimi or something like that. So it's just making sure things are well cooked. Also, once things are cooked, cover and refrigerate straight away. I know a lot of people like to just cover and stick on the bench and let it cool down naturally, but the safest way to actually cool down food is to cover it and put it straight into the fridge. So what we're trying to do is get it down to chilled temperature as fast as possible, and keeping it out of that bacterial growth kind of temperature range, keeping it in that period for as short as possible and getting it out of there. And I guess the other thing is, when you're eating out, is avoiding foods that may have bacterial contamination. So your key areas are salads, sushi, buffet bars, and sushi by the sense of it's the rice and how it sits around. Buffet bars, so what I'm thinking there is takeaways, where you might go to a takeaway and you can go and select your own. You don't know how long that food's been sitting there. So that's where that one's out. And raw and undercooked meats, poultry, fish and eggs. Buying from delis, salads from delis, that sort of thing. and you're in a cafe and there might be a side salad, not having the side salad. You choose off the menu that gets cooked straight away rather than the cabinet food. So it's just those sorts of options. And then the last line I just wanted to talk about is the pressures of eating. I think one of the hardest things what I've noticed with people which I'm working with is when it comes to a new diagnosis or an ongoing diagnosis is we focus a lot on food and we focus a lot on weight, because people will always be checking in, are you eating? And they'll do it out of concern because it's, again, one thing we can do, but also they're checking in. So there's a lot of pressure for you and your family around food and weight. Generally, I think the other pressure comes from most of us find food as a pleasure and it's central to our life. It's how we exist as humans and as family units and etc. As food becomes everything. It's how we celebrate. It's how we show our love. It's how we show we care. We want to feed people generally. But with a cancer diagnosis, food and eating becomes a chore for many people. Often because of the side effects I've mentioned. You know, you might have been a foodie, now it doesn't taste the same, but also because you're just being told to eat. You need to eat to keep your weight. You need to eat to get your nutrition. And then those side effects of no taste, etc., just add to that. So food becomes disappointing because you've always enjoyed it. So there's no joy in food anymore, which is what food should be. It's a bit of the joy factor. It's part of who we are. So those pressures of eating are totally compounded, as I mentioned, because how we show our love and support for others is with food. And when it comes to the family side of things, I mentioned right at the beginning is food is one area we've got control of, but it's also where family and friends have control of, because when it comes to your treatment, the nurses and the doctors are looking after the medical side, and food is the one area where family can take care of. They can show their love. They can play a role. They can bring you food. They can encourage you to eat. And so they will be showing their support by providing food and helping you there. But however, these situations can be hard for you when you may not feel like eating, where you're feeling like you're being nagged to eat, not just by family, by nurses, by the dietitian. It's like eat, eat, drink, drink. And that can become very stressful. So I think it's very important for everyone to kind of be aware of that and just to kind of check in every now and again of how it's going, because it's very normal to go for periods where you don't feel like eating. And I think particularly when you have a new diagnosis, if anyone here is there, or you're starting to feel, well, you may look fine, but you just don't want to eat. And that can be very hard for others to understand. It's like, well, why don't you just eat? So those are conversations I'll often have with people, and we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about them when they're in hospital and what to bring, but just to also give space, because things will get better, your appetite will come back, your taste will come back, you'll start liking food again, you'll want to eat. And don't be insulted if you've made them their favourite meal and they don't want it and they don't like it and they don't finish it, because I think that can be really frustrating for all sides. So that's pretty much most of it. I've just put some where to go for more information. Well, your dietitian's a brilliant one. Anyone in the DHB system, you can be referred to the dietitian. Generally, it happens when you're not eating and losing weight, but there's your doctors and nurses as well, and they also have links to us. If you're outside of the DHB system, the hospital system, there's also a lot of websites. It is mindful to know that some have more information than others, and I've just put some of them here that can have quite evidence-based, accurate information up to date that you can look for. The Healthy Food Guide also often has great recipes. Obviously, if you're following a low-risk diet, just be mindful of that. But really what we're all wanting, and the information here, is about getting you back to where you were so you can enjoy all the things you love doing, whether it's playing with your friend, whether it's taking a car journey, playing on the beach, going for a swim, a run, or just, in the case of my dog, because this is who it is, causing destruction in his bed. So that is the talk for today, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much for that, Franica. That was amazing. It was a really comprehensive and informative overview of nutrition and blood cancer, which I know is a really confusing topic for a lot of people. So thank you for shedding some light on it.
Thanks, Melody.
We do have some questions. First question, do you have any tips for drinking water for people who can't stand the taste?
Often I would encourage to flavour it. So some people will put a wedge of lemon or orange in it. Cordials are fine. Diluting juices. So any of those things can be helpful for water-based. If you don't like water, you can switch to a juice. Some people actually switch to some of your Powerades, those drinks, because they're tolerated better, even lemonade or going to milk. But if it is water, flavouring with a cordial or iced teas. There's lots of the tea-based flavours out there now as well.
Great, thank you. We've had quite a few questions about supplements. So do you recommend people take vitamins? Do you recommend supplements? Someone's asked particularly about green tea extract and turmeric and vitamin C as well.
Okay. Great. I don't generally, and it is worth remembering the majority of people I see are in hospital and are also undergoing treatment. So the general rule of thumb with any supplements during treatment is not taking them to enable your treatment to have the best chance of working. With a lot of supplements, we don't actually know how they may impact on treatment or not. So if you do have questions and that you are taking them, talk to your doctor or the pharmacist to find out. Vitamin C, there is definitely research to show that maxi dosing on vitamin C does not help treatments and negatively impact how treatment works in cancer progression. Vitamin C from your fruit and vegetables is perfectly fine, some juice, but if you were meaning the high dosing injections, then that has not been shown to be beneficial at all.
Cool, thank you. What are your thoughts on intermittent fasting?
Well, as Melody said, I also have a thought on it from a non-diet approach, but I know we're looking at it from a cancer side. Again, there's been some research to show for some people, or there has been some research, but it's not conclusive, that some people may find it's beneficial. If you want to go down that track, I think it's really important to discuss it also with your doctor, depending on your treatment and how that may impact. One of the concerns with any diet is that ability to actually get the energy your body needs. Your body is working harder, you have higher requirements, and a lot of diets, including intermittent fasting, may obviously reduce your intake. Yes, you will likely potentially may lose weight, and is this the time to be losing weight anyway when your body needs to store it? So it's not saying I recommend, but I would support someone and listen to them and work through them how things may work for them.
Cool, thank you. We've got some questions about food safety. So one of them is, what about cheese like blue vein, camembert, brie and feta? Would you recommend?
Okay. Your soft cheeses, no. Generally, it's your hard cheese and cooked cheese. So any unpasteurized cheeses, no. Any pasteurized cheese, soft cheese, should be cooked, not raw. Or not cooked, sorry, because it's technically not raw. There's some really good food safety information on the Ministry of Health and the food safety. They've got some very good data what to follow, but yeah.
Yeah, cool, thanks. And what's your opinion on preparing food on wooden chopping boards? Do you think there's a higher risk of contamination there?
Good question. Look, the key with food safety and preparing is washing the boards extremely well. So hot soapy water or a dishwasher and going above 60 degrees. You don't need to go out technically and buy a whole new set of chopping boards. Our main thing is keep raw meats separate from vegetables and from cooked meats. If your chopping board is in a really bad state and it's got huge grooves and stuff like that, then maybe you might want to change it for your own reassurance. But generally, if you've got a chopping board, it's about washing them really well.
Cool, thank you, that helps. We've had a question about recommendations about food and diet for chronic fatigue. I presume that's related to treatment.
Okay. Oh, I wasn't expecting that one though.
Those are tricky ones.
Chronic fatigue. Okay. I guess I'm thinking chronic fatigue takes on like another element. We still recommend a very balanced, the fruit and vegetable. I'd still be saying small frequent meals, trying to get those, maximizing your food intake into a small volume, because with chronic fatigue, there's periods where you really don't feel like eating, where you just, those sorts of things. So it's still pretty much the same sort of advice. And having a really varied, balanced diet and getting all those good nutrients. Yeah.
And along similar lines, we've had a question about long-term taste loss. Is there anything you'd suggest for that?
No, to be honest, I don't. I have heard of some stuff out of America and that, but I don't know the efficacy of it and actually really if it works or not. We don't, to my knowledge, have anything in New Zealand. Generally, taste does return, but for some people it does take a lot longer to return than others, and I think that's really frustrating. And so the key things we generally do with taste is still about flavoring your food. You know, you might use more herbs and spices, peppers, those sorts of things to try and get some flavor in. But there's nothing I know of as a miracle, wonderful, can treat and return that taste, your taste buds just yet.
And that can be quite hard.
Yeah, well, as I said, I think the hardest thing is if we like food and we lose our taste, then your enjoyment goes, and it is such a chore eating, and it's like a job rather than an enjoyment. And I think that can be really hard on everybody, most people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We've got a question about what kind of health issues are associated with salads and the risk of contamination when preparing them.
The biggest thing with salads is sometimes if they've been washed or not. So there's still the risk of, say, soil, plant material that's not your salad, or foreign bodies being in salad ingredients. So that's why they're encouraged to be washed. So I would normally say when you're eating out, you wouldn't have it because you don't know what they've done. If you're doing it at home, wash your salad very well. So even if you get a bag that says pre-washed, wash it again, dry it, sort of thing, and do that with all your vegetables or peel them.
And actually following on from that, we've had a question about what the best way is to wash your fruit and vegetables. Is it just water? What do you use?
Generally, it can just be water, but a very good wash.
Making sure there's no slugs.
Yeah, making sure there's no slugs moving through it. I think the hard ones are things like your grapes. You know, it's getting in between and washing it really well. Your fruit, those things that grow closer to the ground as well. But it's washing off that soil matter, those sorts of things. If you're concerned, peel. I mean, I frequently joke with patients they can get their loved one to peel their grapes individually and give them to them. No one's actually taken me up on that offer yet, but I think it's just being really mindful of that and probably just throwing it in there. Frozen berries are the one to watch out with, particularly when you've got a low immunity. So generally frozen berries will be fine, but there is some risk because of how they're packaged, etc., picked, that they may contain at times, like we did have a year or two ago, a recall of blueberries because of a listeria risk. So I normally say when you're on a low immunity, is don't do your frozen berry smoothies. They're fine when they're cooked, just not raw.
That's good to know. Thank you. Had a question about the best grains or the healthiest grains to add to porridge. The person who asked currently uses buckwheat and bulgur wheat, and is that a good choice?
No, those are great choices. Those are fine. I think go with things you like. People, any grains, whole grains are just going to add fiber, they're going to add bulk, and they're going to add some nutrition. So it's really going with ones you like, and those are great. A lot of people might use things like quinoa, they might use seeds, those sorts of things, and they're all fine. Nuts are another nice thing you can maybe add to your porridge. They add a bit of texture as well. So.
We've had a question about your thoughts on an autoimmune support diet, especially in the period before treatment.
Okay, I'm probably going to go with not answering because I'm not exactly sure what we're talking about, if that's okay. But I'm happy to look into it, and then if they want to end up giving you details and we can kind of get back to them, that's fine.
Okay, so we've asked that question. If you could, if you want to get some more information, you can send through more details of that diet and we can pass it on to Franica. Just different diets have different names as well, so it's hard to define them exactly, isn't it?
Exactly, and I haven't actually specifically heard of something called that.
Okay, yeah, that's cool. Is it true that you can only digest a certain amount of protein at one time?
No, your body is very capable of digesting protein. In New Zealand, we tend to eat way more protein than we need. Generally, when we have cancer, our recommendation is just over 1 gram, 1.2, 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of our body weight. In New Zealand, we tend to have way more than that. So a general person eats something like 90 or 100 grams of protein a day quite easily, and that's with nothing wrong. And that's probably a smaller person. So we've got an abundance, and our body can cope with it. Some people, if we have too much of anything, it's not a good thing. So it's all about moderation and keeping it to smaller amounts. And mainly because if we eat too much, it means there's probably something else we're not eating. So we want to keep that balance.
Cool. Thank you. And what are your thoughts on fermented foods such as sauerkraut?
Yeah, personally, I'm not a huge lover, but if you like it, you can have it. Again, people have been having them for years and years and years and years and years, and they've been around, and they're a great way. Some people will love them and firmly believe in them, and there is some stuff to, again, there's talk out there that fermented foods, etc., will help prevent or help improve outcomes and stuff. Again, there's nothing around it, so I think it's a taste preference. If you like it, have it.
Sounds good. I like that approach to food.
Yeah, exactly.
Another question, what are your thoughts on fueling our bodies on ketones versus glucose?
Again, I guess it comes down to there's actually not a lot of research at all that's been done in this area. What has been shown that there's no improvement in prognosis or progression of disease, but some people report an improved quality of life, so it works for some people. It takes a lot of planning, it tends to be more expensive, and at times when people don't have a lot of energy, it's not something I would be recommending, but it comes down to a personal preference. If you're going to do anything like that, it's still about ensuring your body gets the nutrients it needs, so it should be done in consultation to making sure you're getting that variety and that balance. The biggest risk, as mentioned before, with a lot of diets is overwhelmingly you end up getting less nutrition or less energy at a time when your body needs more. So you need to be very careful about that.
Thank you. That's good advice. And another question, is there any reason not to enjoy chicken and fish curries?
There is absolutely no reason not to enjoy them. You should enjoy them. Just make sure your chicken's cooked, and same with your fish. But definitely brilliant source of foods, things you can throw vegetables in at the same time, which is never going to do you any harm, but enjoy them.
Sounds good.
For the fresh, obviously.
And another question, what about probiotics, particularly if you're on antibiotics? The example's been given, augmentin for a neutropenic fever.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I feel like this is another one. It comes up every now and again, and it's an answer I would rather re-look at before I come back. And I just, because I times get my confused between my pre and my pros, and Melody may have an opinion on this one too, but we do need to be careful. I guess the hard thing, and will be the full disclosure, is a lot of research with what is good or what is you can't have, and what we recommend with low immunity or when you're neutropenic is based on research from a while ago. And it's obvious, and it's before a lot of foods were actually around, like prebiotics and probiotics. And nowadays it's not ethically possible, or we wouldn't be actually figuring out if these things are okay for people when they're neutropenic, when they're more susceptible. We're not going to give them foods that may cause damage because there's too great a risk. So generally the word of thumb is, if you're introducing something when you have a low immunity, it's maybe best not to, if it does have a chance of adding bacteria, etc., even if they're good bacteria. But it is something I'm quite happy to take offline as well.
Okay, so if that person wants to email through some more details, and we can follow that one up as well. Cool, I think that's all of our questions. So thank you so much for that, Franica. That was really, really interesting and really informative. And thank you everyone else for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.